Well, the Democratic National Committee has a couple of problems. And it appears that when you have problems, you make bad decisions. And to talk about perhaps some of those bad decisions, we've brought on the only Chip Rogers over from Americans for Fair Treatment. Thanks for joining us, Chip.
Yeah, so glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's not skip any of the pretense stuff. What's going on at the DNC and what do you guys have to do with it?
Well, we got to go back a little bit in time. The DNC forever has been pestering and criticizing and going after private sector employers over union issues and supporting all sorts of lawsuits and things that really pester and hamper these private sector companies, even when they face tough economic times and they have to let some employees go.
The only reason that you're not, setting up a union in your small cake shop is because you hate your laborers. You want to treat them like slaves, all that classic DNC line. I've heard it a million times.
That's the nonsense that they've been peddling for quite some time. But now they face a situation themselves where they did exactly the same thing. In fact, even worse than most private sector employers. So,
share.
Yes, here's the situation. A couple of years ago, the employees at the Democratic National Committee decided that they wanted to unionize. And of course, the DNC supported this idea, at least publicly. Well, after having a record-breaking last couple of years leading up to the elections, they decided to fire almost all of those employees and give them 1 day notice with no severance whatsoever. Now, had the private sector industry, anyone in private sector industry, had they done this, labor unions, the DNC would have been going after them. But now the DNC has done it to their own union members.
So what you're saying is the DNC played stupid games and they might be about to win a very stupid prize. Is that about right?
Well, look, the reality is this, is they had to face the economics of losing a national election. Right. And when that happens, when you run an election, you lose. Some of the resources begin to dry up. They looked at that and realized we can't have all these people employed because we're kind of going under. And so what they did is they just got rid of all of them. Now, that's understandable in any real world situation, but because the laws are the way the laws are, you've got to give them notice. You've got to jump through a lot of hoops that have been put in place for employers, and the DNC, being as hypocritical as they could be, didn't do any of that. Again, 1 day notice, no severance.
So we're in a situation in which the party that said this is really good for the goose. Everybody, we've got to get this out there. This is something really good for the goose. Unionization, we've got to have all of these rules and policies so that you can't, fire anyone. You got to give them all of this advance notice, and you got to maybe in some states reasonable cause and severance and all this other stuff. But then when it's time for the gander also to receive the same treatment, well, all of a sudden, hey, wait a minute. I mean, we lost an election. What more do you want? Well, that would be to follow the rules that you pushed for, as you said, decades and decades.
Exactly. And they're facing the reality that businesses all across this country face in tough economic times. And that is when you run out of money and you can't pay employees, what do you do? I mean, we never want to get in that situation, but it does occur from time to time. And the DNC has been pushing policies for decades to make it almost impossible for these private sector companies to respond in tough economic conditions. But when it happens to them, they respond in the most brutal way. And of course, the union, rightfully so, is quite upset about this.
So this is one of the things I want to ask you, and just to go ahead and get the very last analogy or metaphor that I can use, the taste of their own medicine is in fact very bitter. I don't think I have any more analogies, stacked up back in the brain, but we'll see. This lawsuit could theoretically become a rather major scandal, not just in the public sphere, but also in the courts. Where do you expect this lawsuit to develop to? I mean, is this going to try to be shuttled away quietly, or is this going to be kind of a large courtroom battle? What are you looking for here?
Well, it's before the National Labor Relations Board, and of course, those things can happen quickly. They can take quite some time. But I will tell you this, it's not the same National Labor Relations Board they thought they were going to have to deal with. Obviously, it has changed since the election. So we'll see what the NLRB wants to do. I certainly don't want to put anything out there that would suggest one way or the other how they should act. We trust that they'll make the right decision. But the reality is the National Labor Relations Board, under both Republican and Democratic control for years, have very much frowned on activities like this when you just wipe away all your employees, no notice, no severance. And so we'll see how they react to this one.
Is there something the DNC, I mean, they're facing scandal upon scandal upon scandal right now, with Vice Chair David Hogg rushing to throw $20 million at these incumbent races that he doesn't want the incumbents sticking around for anymore, and then being given an ultimatum by the DNC. There's a lot of scandal that's currently in the works over on that particular organizational table. But, oftentimes when there's a lawsuit that's brought up, there's a very simple thing one can do to kind of make it go away. And that, takes several different forms, given, if they could, accede to some requests. What are the requests on the table here for the plaintiffs?
Well, we'll see what the NLRB rules first. I mean, that's the first step in this. But I would say this. You point out another level of hypocrisy here. You've got this young man who came to fame under some terrible circumstances, but really, as you have seen unfold over the last few weeks, is not ready for prime time, out there suggesting he's going to use $20 million of the DNC money to go after other Democrats. Look, if they've got $20 million laying around, maybe one way to get this complaint to go away is to go back to those poor DNC workers that were fired and pay them at least some severance. If they've got $20 million extra dollars, they can give it to some of the people who were probably working for pennies to begin with. I mean, you know how it is working the political world. You don't work for a lot of money. You work for a cause. They didn't even get any severance.
Does it perhaps say anything about the DNC itself to espouse such values about being for the common worker and then, paying their workers basically a wooden cent piece?
Well, it nullifies the kind of that high level that they always used to take, the righteousness,
high horse, yeah.
The self-righteousness that they pronounced over the quote working class, which they've lost a lot of that over the last few elections. And this just furthers that. It just shows that, it's a lot of talk, no action. Again, 1 day notice, no severance, and now they have the DNC vice chair talking about spending $20 million against their own sitting Democrat incumbents, which, I've been involved in politics for years. Usually you don't use money that's given to the party to go after other members of the party, especially when you've got poor people that got laid off that didn't get anything.
And that's one of the things that I'm looking for here, because what we've seen after the election is a lot of kind of rogue operators that have started going out on the left and just kind of wreaking havoc, turning over a lot of tables, exposing a lot of things under some logs, maybe like the cover-up of Joe Biden's mental state, maybe cover-up of perhaps some of the actions of organizations like Act Blue. Do you see the DNC leadership maybe a little bit nervous about the consequences of, just giving everyone the pink slip up front, that maybe they might have opened themselves up to a leak here or there, or, perhaps some unsavory information coming out before the public?
Yeah, look, I think the quickest way to lose your donors for any cause is to be shown as a hypocrite, right? And so it's not just the DNC. The RNC, I'm sure, has had challenges in the past. Any cause that people are involved with, if you come out and you're very hypocritical of the things you say you stand for, well, then that money is going to dry up. And I think that's probably the one thing that they're most worried about, and why they probably don't like this story, is because it shows that they weren't really for the working person at all. They weren't for supporting the unions at all, because look at the behavior when given the opportunity to do the right thing. And then, as you pointed out, and we've mentioned a couple of times here, to layer on top of that, apparently they've got $20 million extra dollars sitting around already to attack themselves. So why not give it to those poor workers? And see, this is the type of hypocrisy that the average donor, the Act Blue donor, the big donors look at and say, I can't continue to financially support that. And so I think that's the real risk they run.
And I think that part of that risk comes in groups that you referenced maybe obliquely. For example, at least in my mind, like the UAW. When I'm looking at like the Teamsters, I'm looking at the union heads who, like Sean Fain, for instance, who had put a lot of support behind the Democrat Party, who had put a lot of money behind the efforts to elect blue members of the House, the Senate, state legislatures, governor's races. And now all of a sudden he's and other union leaders around the country are sitting back and watching, again, what they very openly in public criticize. Higher ups, administration individuals in the company, in the organization, that are throwing around money so casually. And I do wonder, especially given Trump's kind of a big tent approach to his campaign, if you might actually start to see some unions just kind of forego donations until the DNC makes this right. And that's a stubborn group of people. To make something right in the political world requires a lot more humility than is usually sitting on reserve.
Well, you make a good point that's quite historically accurate. I would say this, at Americans for Fair Treatment, which is the organization I run, we focus on public sector unions. And one of the things we talk about a lot is what this subject matter, which is why is money being taken in the form of union dues and being given for political purposes to begin with? And so when you see this type of hypocrisy, both with the layoffs, the lack of a severance, and now the $20 million that allegedly might be used to go against other members of your own party, you have to begin to wonder, why are those union members having money taken out of their pocket and then being used for political activity that they may have no interest in supporting whatsoever?
When I was a teacher, we saw this in the teachers' unions all the time. Yeah. One of the reasons that I didn't spend $1,000 of my own money a year to be part of the ISTA in Indiana was because I didn't want to see $1,000 of my own cash going to political causes that were advocating directly against me. That was silly.
Yeah, I mean, think about your life as a teacher and the one that most teachers face. My mother's a retired public school teacher, and you don't get paid much because you're doing a public service. You really ought to be probably paid a heck of a lot more. You're making a very positive impact on society. We thank you for all that. But now we're going to have a teachers union come in, take your money from you, and then give it to a cause that you don't even believe in. Or if you believe in them, in this particular case, now they're full of hypocrites. And so this is why we need to get union money out of politics.
I think you're pretty dead on there. And I'm looking forward to seeing, obviously, the developments in this particular lawsuit. I'm looking forward to seeing kind of how the country's psyche on the relationship between unions, as well as the kind of open political organizational structures change over the next couple of years, because I do think times are changing in that way. Chip Rogers, CEO over at Americans for Fair Treatment. Thanks for joining us.